Welcome, class. Today we're going to talk about corporate culture. I think it's pretty self-evident that strong leadership can make a difference, obviously, in a company because they control the purse strings. It's the leadership that decides how to allocate the resources, and on the basis of the allocation of the resources, the cultural profile of the company is defined. Let me give you a great story about a company that my brother-in-law worked for called Merck Pharmaceuticals. Merck Pharmaceuticals, like any other pharmaceutical company, had a goal of developing and innovating new vaccines and drugs that would help solve problems that existed, obviously, in a target market that could afford to pay for the pills or the needles or whatever it was that they were getting. One of their researchers was working on a drug that didn't have quite the same market potential as any of the other products they had. This was a drug to try to fight a horrible disease that existed on the continent of Africa and in many of the African countries called river blindness. And the way that it worked, very simply, was that this, sort of like a mosquito, would land on a person, and when it bit the person, the bite was not really to take anything out of the person, it was to inject its eggs under the skin of the person, and that's where the eggs would be safe and incubated. As the eggs developed, of course, the little buggy things, whatever they're called, would then begin to crawl through the body because they had been pre-programmed and invited to this immense feast and festival in a certain particular part of the body. And that's where all these little bugs were going. So now by the time that these bugs started to crawl through your skin, you could of course feel that. It was very itchy, very uncomfortable, but it was a way of life for the people who lived in these small, unsophisticated communities. They just expected it to happen. Eventually, the bugs made their way to what would to them be the Disneyland of the human body, and that was just behind the human eye, where they feasted on the optic nerve and caused the person to go blind. So essentially, you had in many, many communities, 70 to 80% of the people were blind. They couldn't see because of this disease. Now, this disease also affected animals. And so what this researcher conjectured was that perhaps the drug that was being used for the animals, although it didn't stop them from going blind, it had other goals, could be used for humans. And he decided to work on it. Now, the president, Mr. Vagelos, of Merck Pharmaceutical, had to make a decision. You have a top research scientist using the resources of Merck Pharmaceutical, and he's working on a drug for the average African bush dweller. They're not going to be able to afford to pay for a pill. There's no average annual income there. There's nothing going on there. How are they going to pay for the pill? But the mission statement of Merck Pharmaceutical was that people come first, and the profits come second. So he allowed the researcher to do the research for this particular drug. It took him 10 years. It cost Merck Pharmaceutical approximately $40 million. During the 10 years, Mr. Vagelos went to the American government, to the African governments, the United Nations, all over the planet to see if somebody would sponsor and cover the cost of the development of this drug. Nobody stepped forward. So essentially, Merck Pharmaceutical had to cover the entire cost of this drug, called Mectizan. What was amazing about the drug is when they gave it to the villagers, one dose kills the bug, stops it. If you were itchy, half an hour later, there's no itch. If you catch the person fast enough and it hasn't reached the eye, they're never going to go blind. One dose, all that's required, kills the drug immediately. It was an amazing drug. Nobody wanted to sponsor it. America didn't want to put the American flag on it. United Nations didn't want to put the United Nations flag on it. Why? Because they considered all these people disposable. But Merck Pharmaceutical didn't. So they developed the drug. Now they discovered there's a whole other problem. What's the other problem? Well, it's not like all these people live in the city of Toronto, or London, or Paris, where you can just sort of give a shipment and tell them to go pick it up at their local, CVC pharmacy. No, these people lived in the jungles and in the backwoods, and they were everywhere. So Merck had to invest its time and its money and try to get other people on board who could at least take the drug and get it to the people. And fortunately, there was a scientific community that was doing research out there that all agreed to take the drugs with them and into all the back and far reaches of the continent and give it to as many people, and they virtually almost wiped out the disease, according to what I know. That's an amazing story. I can tell you that my brother-in-law tells me the story. I think they did a special on 60 Minutes. Again, same story. The pride that was felt by every employee of Merck Pharmaceutical was off the scale. You couldn't measure it. Everybody who came to work, knowing what the company had done for so many unfortunate people, couldn't do enough for the company. The researchers, who are the heart and soul of the company, when they saw that they were allowed to investigate and develop innovative solutions for problems that may not necessarily be economically viable, inspired themselves and did far better work than they ever would have done had they been in some sort of dictatorial or autocratic management environment. So that was an amazing accomplishment. And it shows you what strong leadership can do, because someone had to say, go develop the drug. Now, in our realm, of the academic realm and the practical realm, the question is, does a company have a social responsibility like this to society? And I think the answer is yes. We have to find, ethical companies have to find a way to balance, to find that special place where you have an economic success, you function obviously within the law, and you meet these social goals. Merck did it. They did it, by the way, before for penicillin in Japan as well. And many other companies. Malden Mills, another company we'll talk about, same thing. This is not impossible to do, and it doesn't predicate the elimination of the company because they're not competitive enough or not successful. Quite the contrary. I think if you go in depth in this story just about Merck, you can realize how those decisions that they made were so wise for the company. Now, if you were given a choice to create a culture in a company, what would you choose? A company that's based on the rights of the people that are in the company, or a company that's based on the obligations of the people in the company? You want the rights or the obligations? Now, most people, when you ask them that question, they have a pretty fast response. And the response is, well, of course, we want to ensure that everyone has, quote unquote, equal rights. What's very interesting is that in a society based on rights, you, as the individual who may have rights, are always dependent on others to actualize your rights. So if you have a right to education, you are dependent on the school board existing so you can have that free education. Or if you have a right to free medical care, you are dependent on the government providing a system where they actually hire doctors and have hospitals and deliver that free health care to you. And therefore they can define what that looks like. But when you have a organization and a company that's based on the obligations of a person, then that's turned completely upside down. Now it's not what the other person will do for you, but what you will do for them, because you have obligations in this company. You have an obligation to be honest. You have an obligation to be on time. You have an obligation to conduct yourself with integrity. That falls on you. You may have heard President John F. Kennedy, way back in the 1960s, made a very famous statement to the country of America. He said, "Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." That's what an obligations-based culture demands. And it becomes totally within your power to deliver it. Because you know what the obligations are. All you have to do is do them. And if everybody does them, then the rights that people have are automatically met. Management is responsible for developing those strategies. Management is responsible for the values in a company, for the vision that the company has, for the mission statement that the company has, because those three components then lead you to a strategy and goals that you believe will meet the mission statements of the company. And once you have strategies and goals, then making that choice will give you tactics and actions that you can use to implement and accomplish the goals. I'm going to tell you, in terms of understanding this from a partnership perspective, the culture of a company either empowers its employees or it demeans its employees. Very rarely is it neutral. When it demeans its employees, the employees begin to function at between 70 and 80% efficiency. And so you get 80% people, which means you have to hire approximately 20% more people to get yourself to the same place you would have been had your employees been working at 100% of their potential. Milton Hershey, you may have heard of the Hershey chocolate bar. He was a warrior a team player. He was an amazing, effective leader because of the teams that he built. And he focused on the empowerment of his employees. He gave them low mortgage rate homes when other companies would not sell employees homes. They would just rent homes to them and, of course, make the money on the rentals. He created a free college, 5,000 students for his employees. He built a free theme park for his employees. You may have heard of it. It's in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Hersheyland. Amazing place to go to. Over 200 rides. You cannot be a leader unless you have a vision and values and goals. And they will be diverse, but they must be focused on the partnership that you have in your organization. In Stu Leonard's, the employees were empowered because the company was delivering satisfaction to their customers, who were also similarly empowered, and that made the employees feel great. It made them feel like the efforts that they were making had value. This is all accomplished by the culture that you bring to the table.